Just ahead, there's another edition of the Florida Roundtable, a service of Florida's Talk and Entertainment Networks. I'm Reagan Smith, Public Affairs Director of the Florida News Network.
And I'm political analyst Al Spry. We're talking politics. We're talking fascism in America. What an interesting conversation in store, Reagan.
And all of it revolving around our economy and your day-to-day living, with economist Hunter Lewis as our special guest. We'll invite you to pull up a chair and put an ear on the radio. The Florida Roundtable will begin following these messages. This is the Florida Roundtable, a service of Florida's Talk and Entertainment Networks. I'm Reagan Smith, Public Affairs Director of the Florida News Network.
And I'm political analyst Al Spry. As always, it is a pleasure to be sharing these quarters with you, Reagan.
Oh, it is indeed, sir. Nice to see you again this week. We got lots of territory to cover. And before we get started, too, we want to mention that in the Orlando area, you can see us on Tough TV 38, Al.
Yes, you can watch us on Tough TV 38, Florida Roundtable, airing Thursdays at 9 a.m. and then again on Saturday at 9 a.m. Tough TV 38 in Orlando. You can get it over the air with an antenna. You can get it in select apartment complexes and mobile home parks. You can also get it on Tough TV 38 on Channel 69 on the Summit Broadband Cable TV system. And if you can't receive it, ask your cable system or satellite provider to carry Tough TV 38. Also, check out some videos that we've done on YouTube by putting in Florida Roundtable, and you'll be able to check that out as well.
Aha. All right. Well, lots to talk about today. Where would you like to start, sir?
Well, I'd like to start with the winner and loser of the week politically here in Florida. Let's do a little Florida focus. The winner is David Jolly. Who is David Jolly? Well, David Jolly is the man who got the endorsement from the great beyond, Reagan.
Oh, really?
Yes. I'm talking heaven. I'm talking clouds. I'm talking the whole rigmarole right there. We got golden steps. We got everything. We got St. Peter.
Yeah.
We also have Bill Young. He's there now because he passed away recently.
That's right, yeah. Okay.
He represented his Pinellas County District for nearly 43 years until his death about 3 weeks ago. Rest in peace. But he left some instructions about who he wanted to run for his now vacated seat. That is David Jolly. Not his wife, who had some interest in running for that vacated seat.
We thought that was going to happen, yeah.
Well, she can't beat him over the head with a frying pan now because he's dead. So it's going to be David Jolly. David Jolly, the little-known lobbyist and former aide to Bill Young. Of course, he looks likely to avoid a serious GOP primary challenge because of this anointing from the great beyond.
But Bill Young actually wrote this stuff down before he passed. I thought we were going to talk about William Jennings Bryan, who used to tell the country that he conversed with God every day and that God told him exactly how the country should be run, and that's why he should be the president,
But it makes more fun to say he got it from the great beyond,
Yes, it does.
It is showbiz after all.
The evangelical one.
And, of course, George Lemieux, the former senator appointed by Charlie Crist, is the loser of the week. Why, you ask? Well, Charlie Crist transformed George Lemieux from an obscure and unsuccessful political operative into a wealthy former U.S. senator. So you think a grateful Lemieux would keep quiet about his disappointment in his old friend becoming a Democrat now. Yeah. However, this is not the case.
All right.
Mr. Lemieux was first in line to publicly trash the man to whom he owes so much.
Really?
So he's got a big L on his forehead now. He is loser of the week. No gratitude whatsoever, Reagan.
He's staying in the Republican Party. He didn't follow Mr. Tutan into the Democrats.
No, and of course he has no career now, but he does have a nice pension as a senator.
Well, he can always go into lobbying if he stays in the D.C. area.
He probably already is. They all do.
Makes him nice and wealthy. Yeah.
He wants a little piece of that crony capitalistic pie.
Okay. Yes.
That's what I'm going to talk about.
All right.
And of course we have Charlie Crist facing the Truthometer meter 3 times in his announcement speech.
Yeah.
Chucky Doodle said, "I'm proud of my record as the governor investing in public education and stopping the layoffs of some 20,000 school teachers during the global economic meltdown." We rated that, according to this article, half true. Now we have another quote. "Rick Scott is a governor who cares so little about education, he didn't even come to his own education summit," Chris said during the announcement speech, but he did take time to go to the Tea Party convention the same week. That claim is actually true. And, of course, we have this one. On MSNBC, Chris said, "First thing Rick Scott does when he comes in is cut education by $1.3 billion. That's an incredible decrease. And then in his second year, he decreases funding by $300 million to our state universities." We rated that one mostly true. So we got, he's so far, not too bad. Not lying too much yet. But then again, the campaign, it's early in the campaign season.
It's way early, yes. We haven't even officially, I mean, we're still a year away here. Holy cow. I don't know how are we going to put up with all this for a year.
We're going to take heavy sedative drugs,
and find
except when we're on the air.
We can find some things to laugh at along the way, I'm sure. All right. Well, this is the Florida Roundtable. I'm Reagan Smith.
I'm Al Spry.
We will be joined by Hunter Lewis as our conversation continues. We are back. You're listening to the Florida Roundtable, the service of Florida's Talk and Entertainment Networks. I'm Reagan Smith.
And I'm Al Spry.
And Al, as promised at this point in the program, we are joined by the co-founder of AgainstCronyCapitalism.org, Hunter Lewis. You have seen him on ABC's Money Matters. He's been on the NBC Today Show, lots of television and radio programs. And Mr. Lewis, welcome to the Florida Roundtable.
Good to be with you.
Well, we're delighted to have you with us, sir. And tell you what, instead of my sitting here and telling your biography and your notes and all that sort of thing, why don't you go ahead and take the first minute or so here and just tell us a little bit about yourself, your educational background, etc.
Well, the main thing about me is that I started an investment firm, which is now a global investment firm. And that's gotten me very interested in economics over the years, which, of course, led to my books.
Well, I can tell you it's great to have you on. Here's an interesting quote to kick things off. This is Matt Drudge tweeting recently. Matt Drudge and I like some of what he says. Some of what he says appeals to me. He's going beyond the Republican versus Democratic thing, which I can appreciate, because we've had Jesse Ventura on, and he calls them gangs in the style of the Crips and the Bloods of L.A. This is his quote. "It's now authoritarian versus libertarian. Since Democrats versus Republicans has been obliterated, no real difference between parties." I wanted to get your take on that quote.
Well, I think there are differences between individual public officials, for sure. But I have to agree that there's not enough difference between the parties. And after all, the same economic policies that George W. Bush pursued have been pursued by Obama, just on steroids. And the Federal Reserve, the chairman appointed by Bush, was reappointed by Obama. When Obama said, I'm giving us a new approach to economic management, I mean, how did he do that? He just reappointed Bush's Fed chairman. So there's been more similarity than dissimilarity. And certainly in the area of crony capitalism, there's been a great deal of similarity as well. I mean, both parties are allied with special interests, and they try to feed those special interests. And so there's too much similarity there as well.
But what do you think about the part about authoritarian versus libertarian? This is where I come from with a lot of my ideas, that you could call authoritarian, you could call it socialist, you could call it fascist, but it's basically two sides of the same coin. And of course, that's control over the American population and a loss of individual freedoms as enumerated in the Constitution.
Well, that's part of it too. I mean, I always say that we have two sides of the same coin right now. In the fact that we have bad economic policies on the one hand, and misguided economic policies. And then on the other side of the coin, we have this crony capitalism, which just flows right out of the bad economic policies, where government's allied with big business, big finance, big labor, big law, and they're all working together to create deals for themselves that benefit themselves and don't benefit the public. And you certainly see that just economically. I mean, the average American has been losing ground for years and years. The average American lost ground during the crash, of course, in the recession, but has lost even more ground since then. And the average real income is back to 1989 levels.
That angers Reagan and myself, because it doesn't have to be that way. There's been a concerted effort, in my opinion, and I think in Reagan's as well, to remake America. To remake America in the style of a fascist nation. I like to use crony capitalism and fascism interchangeably because they're basically the same thing. And so we've seen a concerted effort by both parties to, number one, do away with trade tariffs and the so-called free traders. And, of course, that has led to a mass exodus of jobs. Like Ross Perot predicted, the giant sucking sound, of course, sucked out, 60,000 factories, millions and millions of jobs that now for people that now have to rely on the government in order to just get by every day. And also a concerted effort among big business and banking and the United States government in order to grab more power and grab more money. Reagan, I wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Well, I want to focus for a moment or two on Hunter's. He's got a couple of brand new books here, and one, Free Prices Now: Fixing the Economy by Abolishing the Fed, which goes to the point where you're talking about. I mean, Woodrow Wilson's the man that gave us the Fed, and we have very little. We have nothing to say about it. It's an independent body. There's
very secretive.
Yeah, we have the general public has no supervision of this group at all, and so I wanted you to kind of dive into that. Why you think the book is necessary at this point, and I think that probably goes to what Al has been saying here. But what got you all motivated and excited to write this book? Well,
the Fed is really the heart of the problem right now, and the Fed is very little understood by people. I wouldn't call it independent, because when people have made freedom of information requests to get documents from the Fed, they say, the Fed is a private institution, so you can't have the documents. But, of course, it's actually a government institution. The Congress has delegated its powers and money to the Federal Reserve in a way which is not really constitutional. It's certainly not the way it's been run. And in effect, we have our own sort of government planning agency like the Soviet Union had, but ours is called the Fed. And they're trying to run the economy and fine-tune the economy, and no government agency can do that. They've made a terrible job of it. Since their foundation, what is now 100 years ago, the dollar's lost 97% of its purchasing power. We've had more economic disturbance and bubble and bust since then than before.
And that was and the Fed was supposed to prevent that, right? That was the whole point of the Fed, was to prevent the bubbles and busts.
Absolutely. Now the Fed was really created because private interests wanted to work more closely with government. But certainly the rationale, the excuse for it, was to manage the economy to prevent panics, bubbles, and busts. But we've had more of them since. And most recently, the Fed has been particularly injuring the economy. Alan Greenspan gave us the dot-com bubble and bust, and then he gave us the housing bubble, and Bernanke, the next chairman, made it even worse. Then we had the bust in 2008, and then, of course, they've been trying to blow up bubbles to deal with that. So each step has just taken us further down the road to a ruined economy. And now we have Janet Yellen, who is about to have her hearings for confirmation as chairman starting this Thursday, and she's even worse than Ben Bernanke. So we just keep going from bad to worse, from the frying pan into the fire. And it's the average person, the middle-class person, the poor person, who's paying the price for this.
Amen to that. And I will make the point, which it's very hard, and I was telling Reagan this right before the show. It's hard to label people. I know people have the tendency to want to try to label other people and other groups, and then as soon as they get a label, then they automatically discount whatever that person has to say. I'll give you a good example. Bernie Sanders, independent from Vermont, self-ascribed socialist. However, this is the same man who put forth a bill to have the first of ever of any kind of audit of the Fed. So you see, you got similarities between, of course, the guy on the left, Sanders, and of course somebody like Rand Paul, who's on the right. So really, when you stop labeling, you'll see that both sides are trying to do something about this problem. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, you see that more and more, that there's a kind of a coming together of populists on the left, populists on the right. What is a populist? That's just somebody who wants for the government to be run for the average person, for Americans in general, not for special interests. So being a populist, I think, is a very good thing. And we see more and more really coming together between the left and the right. There is this difference that the populists on the right are libertarians, and they say that the government taking over the economy, moving more and more, having more and more control, has completely backfired. It's just led to crony capitalism. And whereas the populists on the left aren't yet convinced of that, they think somehow the government can be reformed and can succeed in managing the economy. So that's a fundamental difference. But in many respects, they're working together now.
Well, now, how do you say we can save this economy by abolishing the Fed? Enumerate some of the things for us that you see the Fed doing wrong here and why it needs to go.
Well, for most of American history, as I mentioned, we didn't have a Fed. So it's self-evident that we don't have to have a Fed. It's not necessary. And what the Fed does is just making things worse and worse and worse because they're trying to manage and actually fine-tune their management of the economy. And that doesn't work. I mean, the Soviet Union showed that doesn't work. And in effect, the Fed is a great price controller. One of our most important prices in the economy right now, of course, are interest rates and also the currency rate. And the Fed and other central banks try to completely control short-term interest rates. They try to manipulate and distort long-term interest rates. They try to control currencies. And by the way, with respect to that trade question that was just discussed a few minutes ago, the way that governments try to control trade these days is more through the currency manipulation than through protective tariffs. But in any case, the Fed has got its finger on all these prices. It's distorting them. And most economists agree that price controls don't work. They really injure an economy. You can't have a market system with government price controls, and yet we just go further and further in the direction of controlling prices.
Well, what about this current policy that we month to month we seem to be having problems here? Bernanke's not sure which way they're going to go, and this purchase, this insertion of about $85 billion a month into the economy. Where do you see that going? Has it been effective? What's up with that?
Well, I mean, in effect, the Fed is printing $85 billion of new money every month, and actually it's more like $100 billion for technical reasons I won't get into. So it's a huge amount of money that the Fed is creating out of thin air. And of course, all that leads to is inflation. It's inflation either of asset prices like real estate that we've seen, or the stock market today we're seeing, or bond prices, or it's the inflation of goods. And of course, eventually, all this money is being created will lead to more inflation in goods. But in the meantime, the way the government measures consumer price inflation understates it, so that they keep changing the way they measure it, and so it's reported that there's very little inflation going on right now. But the average person knows that there's a lot more inflation than they're admitting.
Thank you for saying that. Because you know what? When it comes down to the average person and the money power that they're having, it's getting less and less and less. But if you ask the Fed, we're keeping inflation at very minimal levels.
Yeah, well,
ask that to the person who's
walking out of a grocery store.
Exactly, grocery store, going to buy something, maybe go see a movie. I see the prices keep going up, but the income is not going up.
Well, exactly. The income is going down, the average income, and the prices are going up more than they admit. So it's a double blow.
On that note, Hunter, we need to take a pause along our network line. Let us remind folks that they are listening to the Florida Roundtable, the service of Florida's talk and entertainment networks and of Tough TV. I'm Regan Smith.
And I'm Al Spry.
Our very special guest is Hunter Lewis. He is the author of Free Prices Now, Fixing the Economy by Abolishing the Fed, and Crony Capitalism in America, 2008 to 2012. He is an economist par excellence, and if you'll stay put, our conversation continues following these messages. From Pensacola to Key West and all points in between, you're listening to the Florida Roundtable, a service of Florida's talk and entertainment networks. I'm Regan Smith.
And I'm Al Spry.
Our very special guest this day is economist Hunter Lewis. He has two brand new books on the market, Free Prices Now, Fixing the Economy by Abolishing the Fed, and Crony Capitalism in America, 2008 to 2012. Should be available at all the fine bookstores, places like Amazon.com. And Hunter, thank you so much for being with us today.
Great to be with you.
It's great to have you on. I appreciate the fact that you're out with two books. That's very cool. Let's turn back to what we were talking about earlier. I think it was Upton Sinclair who said, when fascism comes to America, it'll be waving the flag and wearing a cross. Of course, you could update that for waving the flag and wearing a pair of Adidas or something. So let's talk about how fascism came to America and what happened over the last 40 years. How did we go from everyone being happy, robust middle class, singing a song, doing a dance, to where we are now, which is, where we were just talking about?
Well, when we think about fascism, of course, we think about Hitler and Mussolini, and then we think about Hitler killing all those people, so that it's a very emotionally fraught word. But if you just look at the economic policies that were developed originally by Mussolini and then copied by Hitler and copied to a certain degree by Roosevelt and by others, we are using those same economic policies today. So I sometimes refer to it as fascism light, to denote that it's not Hitler and his gas chambers, but it is pretty much the same economic policies. And what it does is, unlike communism, which said that the state would own the economy and would run it, fascism says, oh no, the government won't own the economy. We'll let private interests own the economy, but we'll simply control it. We'll control every move that's made. And that's what was developed by Mussolini, and that's what we've been doing for decades, and that's what we're really doing today. I mean, it's now worse than ever. We had that kind of thing under Bush, but now we really have it under Obama.
And how'd we get here? How did we get here? So if you trace it over the last 45 years, 50 years maybe, you can see a definite pattern. I want to get your take on how we got here.
Well, we got into real economic trouble in the 1970s, and then we had a Fed chairman, Paul Volcker, who did a good job. He's the best Fed chairman we've had in all these series of bad Fed chairmen. And he and Ronald Reagan, did some things together which really helped the economy. And then we had a very good economy for a while before it started to go downhill again with Alan Greenspan, chairman of the Fed. And, of course, ironically, Greenspan was appointed by Ronald Reagan, so that was his absolute worst decision. But, since the middle 90s, it's just been all downhill, mostly because of the Fed. But certainly George W. Bush didn't help things. And then we got to that pivotal election of 2008. And I do think that a lot of that was that when the economy collapsed and when the TARP bill came up and John McCain flew back to Washington and said, we have to pass this thing, if he had done the reverse, if he had said, I don't like bailing out Wall Street and leaving the American people to starve, I suspect he would have been elected. And then we wouldn't be what we're having today, which is this extreme fascist economic policies, even though I do call it fascism light.
I will say one thing where I'll have to disagree with you. If we would have elected McCain, we would have gotten exactly the same thing, and here's why. When you look at the way McCain votes and the way McCain speaks and the way McCain thinks, I don't see any difference between him, Obama, George W. Bush. These guys are into the same fascist ideas and the same crony capitalist ideas. So all you have to do, and I think this has been the way since, I want to say since GW the first, and then through Clinton, and then through Bush Jr., and now into Obama. And it also, you can stick McCain in there too. And you could also stick John Kerry in there if Kerry would have been elected. I don't see any difference between the way these leaders are operating. If you watch them and look at their votes and look at the way they think and the way they speak, I think they're all cut from the same cloth, and I think we'd still be in the same boat.
Well, I think you're right, but there's a bit of a difference in degree, and more importantly, if we hadn't had the crash of 2008 and the way it was handled, we wouldn't have had large majorities in the House, in the Senate, all supporting President Obama in doing things like Obamacare and the stimulus bill, and all. And the stimulus bill, of course, was a great example of crony capitalism, just stuffed to the gills with special deals for friends of the administration. So we wouldn't have had that unique circumstance. And again, it was the Federal Reserve that most of all brought on the crash, both in terms of creating so much money and also in terms of certain banking regulations that they supported, which helped to bring on the crash when it came.
Well, now, you say that the country can escape some of these things basically through honest, unmanipulated prices. We can fix this. How is that? How do we go about that? How do you get us there?
Well, I mean, absolutely, the economy could be fixed. You know, every day people get up and they go to work and they try to make a better life for themselves and their families and their fellow men. You know, that's going on every day. And if the government wasn't stepping in and sticking poking a stick into the wheel and stopping it, progress would just happen naturally. And that's the point that Adam Smith made, that all the efforts and work and aspirations of the people guarantee that we'll have economic progress if it isn't thwarted.
So how do we get people excited about this? How do you motivate them? We can't go door to door and hit people between the eyes with a 2x4 and say, "Wake up."
I think the key thing is young people. If young people, they are really the swing factor in the electorate right now. And of course, they have supported President Obama strongly, and they've supported these policies indirectly without really understanding them. And what have they reaped from it? They've reaped, incredible unemployment. It's almost impossible for a college graduate, even much less a high school graduate, to get a job these days. The administration has put in new overtime rules that make it even harder for young people to get a job. They've helped to saddle the kids with student loans, just unbelievable student debt. And, of course, that's a failed government policy, which has just led to higher college costs and not helped students at all. And then there's Obamacare, which is structured to work against young people. It's the young people who are going to pay higher and higher premiums. They're healthy, but they're being charged as if they're not healthy. Everything the administration has done has been against young people, and yet the young people are supporting them. So that's where the education needs to take place.
That's it, and I wanted to make that point before we go to break. If you don't get the word out to people about solutions, because everyone's distracted, it seems, by whatever their own personal issues and dramas are, in addition to trying to make ends meet, in addition to a myriad of online opportunities and distractions and so forth. So how do you do that? How do you get to the young people and tell them, maybe you shouldn't be working against your own self-interest, your own best. Maybe you should start working for your own self-interest and stop working against your own self-interest?
Well, I think that, and there's already a considerable movement among young people in this direction. Like the crowds that Ron Paul gets when he visits universities. They're big and they're getting bigger, and so I think it's moving in the right direction. But it's just very slow. But it'll get there. And I'm optimistic, and the economy can be fixed, but we have to get the voters engaged and the voters understanding what's going on. Right now they're just very confused.
The mess of the last 6 weeks or almost 2 months now, the president coming out and apologizing. I'm looking at this as another example of where he says, oh, yeah, you can keep your own health care policy if you like it and you're happy. And then we find out, no, you can't because it doesn't meet government standards. Big Brother telling us he's smarter than we are once again in yet another avenue of our lives. And I find myself very resentful of this.
Well, and there's a lot. And of course, Obamacare is a classic example of crony capitalism at work. You know, they called in all the special interests into a White House meeting, and they made a deal. And the medical equipment manufacturers are the only ones that didn't go along, so they got stuck with a big new tax in the bill. They were punished. And a lot of what's wrong with Obamacare, you know, people are not even talking about yet. They're not talking about the fact that it adds $228 to $589, if I recall, to the cost of any employee. So if you're a minimum wage employee and suddenly you cost at least $228 more per hour, in many cases you simply lose your job. They're also not talking about the fact that those Obamacare exchange policies won't, in general, pay the doctor as much. So the doctors won't want you if you have that policy. And none of that's come out yet.
But, I will make this point before we go to break, and then we'll talk more. Nobody can live on a minimum wage anyway, and we could talk more about how to fix that problem.
Yeah. All right. Well, it is time for us to pause again along the network line. Let us remind folks that they are listening to the Florida Roundtable, a service of Florida's Talk and Entertainment Networks and of Tough TV. I'm Reagan Smith.
And I'm Al Spry.
Our very special guest this day is Hunter Lewis. His brand new books, Free Prices Now and Crony Capitalism in America. And we'll continue our conversation following these messages. We're back. You're listening to the Florida Roundtable, a service of Florida's Talk and Entertainment Networks and in the Orlando area on Tough TV. I'm Reagan Smith.
And I'm Al Spry.
Our very special guest, Hunter Lewis, renowned economist. A couple of new books available for you. Free Prices Now and Crony Capitalism in America should be available at all the fine local bookstores around you or places like Amazon.com. And Hunter, thank you for spending all this time with us today. We know how busy you are.
My pleasure.
All right, so I wanted to give you my three-part solution for fixing things, and then we could talk a few minutes about it. Part one, you change the color of currency to, say, red, and then you make a grace period, and everyone has to change the color of their money and trade it in, or they won't have the money. That, of course, gets rid of all that. It gets all that money that's being hidden right now up into the surface. That's the first part. Second part, you institute trade tariffs. You institute trade tariffs to bring the jobs back to America, the ones that all went to China and Indonesia, unsafe working conditions. Free trade has a downside, and people, I think, are starting to realize what the downside is because what's going on in China and what's going on in other countries for workers, they're getting some money, but they're also working in extreme problematic type areas. Then a third part, we need a viable third party in this country. We need to institute somehow get together a viable third party that will not be beholden to the special interests that you spoke of earlier. How we do that? Well, we have to put our think tanks, our minds together and come up with something. So that's my three-part solution. I wanted to get your take on each of that.
Well, I think it's very hard to create an entity that will not be influenced by special interests. When they created the Fed, they convinced themselves that would be true, but it hasn't been true at all. And instead, the Fed has not only been influenced by special interests, it's above all influenced by the government. It's financing all of our deficit spending. It's really making it possible for government to take over more and more of the economy by paying for it, because the Fed is financing the government directly. Now, it's illegal for the government to sell bonds to the Fed, which is selling bonds to itself, but they just send the bonds to New York, and then they buy them back from New York, and so, in effect, the government is selling bonds to itself.
Amazing.
What about the other points that I made? What do you think of those?
Well, let's see. What was the first point?
The changing the color of currency in order to disrupt the black market and bring the money to the surface that's being hidden in offshore accounts and so forth.
Right. Now, you have to be careful about that because, of course, the basic Keynesian idea is that you want spending. You want to get people spending. Mm-hmm. But it's more important what they spend on. And so when the economy crashes, as it did in 2008, and as it likely will again because of the way the government is just kicking the can down the road, you want people to have savings at that point that have not been spent. You want to have something put aside because it can be spent at that moment wisely on good projects and good investments, and you always want to have that reserve. So it's important not to let the government sort of force people to spend or for the government to just spend willy-nilly itself on bad projects.
Well, not to spend, but to bring it up, because we have all this hidden money right now that's not being pushed into the economy, that's being hidden. What about the trade tariffs?
Well, the trade tariffs, I'm more of a free trader because I think that actually I'm convinced by the arguments that free trade helps everybody. That whether it's the foreigner or it's you, it's better for you to specialize in something and for the foreigner to specialize in something. What complicates this is that we don't have free trade, of course. We have this managed trade. Everything's manipulated. The currency values are manipulated. So it's hard to get there. But in an ideal world, free trade would actually be what you want.
And I agree, it's an ideal world, but we don't live in an ideal world. And I think that, of course, charity begins at home. And we need to, if we're going to have the economy that we had, there's only one way to do it. We need to be a manufacturing country again. Reagan?
Well, I wanted to, before we run out of time here, I know that Hunter Lewis, you've got a political consultant partner, Nick Sorrentino, and you've got a very successful watchdog website. I wanted you to tell us about that.
Yes, that's against cronycapitalism.org. Mm-hmm. And we're just chronicling all the crony capitalism that's taking place in America. And unfortunately, it keeps us quite busy.
Yes, I'm sure.
Every day there's a lot more stories about all the special deals between big government, and big business, and big finance, and big labor, and big law, and so on.
By the way, I got that Drudge quote from Nick's article, "The Hipster Fascist Enemies of Open Source Society." So.
Now, Hunter, I presume that your articles and now are the books available through your website as well?
Yes, they are.
Okay. That is againstcronycapitalism.org. The newest books, Free Prices Now, Fixing the Economy by Abolishing the Fed, and Crony Capitalism in America, 2008 to 2012, by Hunter Lewis. They're a fascinating read and an eye-opener, and I don't know what else to say except, it's your economy. You need to pay attention to it, and that's the only way that things are going to get turned around is when the public starts paying attention.
Keep fighting the good fight, Hunter.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for all your time this day, sir, and we hope you'll come back and do this again.
Thanks for having me.
You're listening to the Florida Roundtable, the service of Florida's Talk and Entertainment Networks. I'm Reagan Smith.
And I'm Al Spry.
And we'll be back with a closing thought following these messages. You're listening to the Florida Roundtable. I'm Reagan Smith.
And I'm Al Spry.
And we do appreciate Hunter Lewis being with us today and trust he'll come back and visit again soon.
I don't know. You think we scared him off?
No. I think he was in agreement with us more than not, and we with him. So,
well, before we go, let's talk pot.
Okay.
Florida House Speaker Will Weatherford and Senate President Don Getz filed a brief to the Supreme Court of Florida last week, opposing a proposed medical marijuana constitutional amendment, stating it's misleading and inaccurate rhetoric. You know what I think? I think they're just party poopers, Reagan.
Obviously, they have never met the mayor of Toronto, Mr. Ford.
No, he smoked. No, he smokes the crack pipe. It's something different. It's something totally
in
different.
Drunken stupor.
Right. He's the crack smoker. But
he won't leave office either.
In all seriousness, what would you? I mean, come on. In all seriousness, before we go, I love it when Republicans, who are always talking about how government should lay off the rights of the people and how we should have limited government, always try to tell the people what to do in areas like, say, legalizing medical marijuana. Yeah. All of a sudden, they want to tell you exactly what you should do. I love the hypocrisy. It's yummy.
Stay out of your individual life. But by the way, we have these other laws here for you.
Yes, because we really want to tell you what to do. We just want to pretend like we really think that we don't want to tell you what to do.
All right. Well, as always, we thank you for your time. We do invite your comments. You can send us an email. We still get snail mail here at the Florida News Network. If you want to sit down and write us a letter, we appreciate that. I'm Reagan Smith.
And I'm Al Spry.
And we will see you again in 1 week on most of these same stations with another edition of the Florida Roundtable.
You've been listening to Florida Roundtable, a weekly look at issues and problems of concern to Floridians from a state, national, and international perspective. Presented by the Florida News Network with your hosts, Reagan Smith and Al Spry. The views and opinions expressed during the preceding program are solely those of the participants and not necessarily those of this station's ownership, management, or sponsors of FNN. Your views and opinions are welcome. Address your card or letter to Florida Roundtable in care of Reagan Smith, 2500 Maitland Center Parkway, Suite 407, Maitland, Florida, 32751. Or you may email reagansmith@fnnonline.com. Thank you for listening, and please join us again next week for another edition of Florida Roundtable.